we just, yes, we just got them. Um, so they come in these neat little packages, and on the back of it, it has an eagle with a phoenix that is being killed in the clutches of the eagle. And just so everybody knows that the phoenix is like the ashes, the burning down of things. That's what it represents in order to like rebuild afresh. It's kind of the whole bullshit, build back better garbage, but it's replicative of the Phoenix program, which was basically that whole mantra was burning the entire thing down. And on the front side of it, it has Operation Gladio with an eagle and a sword representing Gladio, with the two indications here of NATO and the CIA. So the compass rose. So we're going to have those. If they're not up on the website, they will be within the next day or so. Obviously, I'm wearing my shirt, and we have the coffee mug. So I forgot to say that yesterday. Mayor Sarge reminded me, and I still forgot in the chat over on Rumble. So I'm really, really suck at this. But I have to share something with you guys. As you can see, I'm kind of doing an overall series of threads to kind of prepare everybody for all of the background and how it ties to fascism and Nazism leading up to the assassination of Kennedy. Okay. So that's kind of my whole goal. I want people to open their brains up and realize that the world is way more complicated in one respect than what they keep trying to make it. And in another respect, very, very uncomplicated in the fact that it keeps repeating the exact same pattern. But I just came across something that, again, every day blows my mind, at least a little bit. I want to read something to you guys. I have to go to this place where I'm trying to put all this information in one post. It's so crazy. But thankfully, Bridget found this thread maker thing that helps me arrange all of this stuff into a logical format. And then post it over to X so I don't have to copy and paste the whole thing over. So let me read this to you. This is an actual quote from an archived news release. Last Friday, the governor ruled to deny the state of Louisiana's request to extradite Edgar Eugene Bradley of North Hollywood. The ruling came approximately 11 months after the indictment was filed by District Attorney Jim Garrison of New Orleans, following the issuance of the at-large warrant on December 20th, 1967. The extradition request containing witnesses' affidavits was approved by the Louisiana AG and Lieutenant Governor on behalf of the governor. Today, Bradley is free. Governor Reagan's Legal Affairs Secretary, Edwin Meese, who handles all legal advisory for Reagan as governor of California, ruled Bradley would not be sent to New Orleans to stand trial at the trial of the century at the time, which was the only investigation into the assassination of JFK. And Ronald Reagan protects this guy with the legal advice of Edwin Meese. You just can't even make that shit up. So, of course, every time I find one of those things, all I have dancing in my head every time I find one is, it's a small world after all. Every single time. So.
Oh, that's hysterical. I can, yeah. Right there. Rinse, wash, repeat. Rinse, wash, repeat.
It's crazy. Okay, so I'm just getting a little settled in here because when I read that, I just like my heart skipped a beat there. The same people in the same cover ups. It doesn't matter um, what's going on at the time. You just have this same group of people hovering in the background that you keep tripping over when you actually know how to put all of this stuff together and where to look to find it. So anyway, it's taken me a little bit of time. I've got 4 segments. I already posted 2 done, but I'm having to go through multiple sources and then check all of the things. Like, for example, I ran across a guy that it says he has all of this nefarious background, which I won't bore you with because it won't make any sense until you actually read the thread. But it says that they just basically inserted him into MacArthur's staff at the towards the end of World War II as a colonel. And I'm like, what the hell? That can't be true. That's got to be something that's way out. No, it was true. Yeah. So anyway, so much crap. Okay. So we're moving on to the second part of the book, the section, I should say, to Colombia, Cocaine, and Oil. This takes place around 2001, which is very interesting timing. Current U.S. involvement in Colombia had escalated by stages since the original commitment to a counterinsurgency program under the Kennedy administration. And keep in mind that all quote unquote counterinsurgencies are actual insurgencies. The key stages that had occurred is number 1, the CIA and Special Forces program in 1962 had began training police and paramilitary groups under the guise of counterinsurgency techniques using sabotage and terror. Number 2, National Security Decision Directive 221 of April 1986, which for the use of U.S. troops in Colombia in alliance with the CIA. 3, Clinton's $1.3 billion aid program in 2000 in support of a thing called Plan Colombia. Now, I've talked about that before. This is basically just a guise in order to use Operation Gladio tactics in Colombia. Number 4, George W. Bush measures since 2001 to expand the U.S. role beyond narcotics, including a program to underwrite Colombian Army security in exchange for putting in oil pipelines. So we buy you an army so you can kill your own people, because that's what they were using it for. In exchange, you allow us to build pipelines and steal basically all the resources from your people because we're the ones that installed you in the government. So you're not going to be making the deal in the best interest of your people because we're going to pay you through banks like BCCI underneath the table so you can sell out your people. In 2001, as this guy was getting ready to publish his book, it seems certain that the violence in Colombia, already exacerbated by decades of U.S. interference, will escalate even further. The new president at the time was last name Uribe Velez, is himself a product of the paramilitary counter-revolutionary system that the United States had installed. Just like I said, it's a pattern. Business Week reported in February 2002 that Uribe Velez claims that if elected president, he will take a firmer line with the rebels. And by rebels, they mean the people who actually want their land back that had been stolen to plant opium. That's just what he did between 1995 and 97 when he was the governor of one of the areas, Colombia's second largest province and one-time home to the infamous Medellin drug cartel. There, Arabi Velez promoted the creation of the controversial conviviers, and I'm going to spell that Convivirs. They were quote unquote self defense patrols, but were actually armed militia supplied with intelligence from the CIA to attack their fellow countrymen who were trying to get rid of all of the CIA implanted terrorists. It wasn't long before some of the local militias, which eventually numbered 67 in that area and over 400 nationwide in Colombia, morphed into the paramilitary squads that targeted the so hold on. The CIA funded over 400 paramilitary organizations, units, whatever you want to call it, that targeted not just the people that they had labeled quote unquote rebels, but also civilian sympathizers. In other words, they had created death squads. This led the Colombian government to strip the convieras of most of their power. And this is the guy that's now going to run for president of the entire country under the guise of CIA. Business Week predicted that Arabi's promise to further such policies on the national level could well drag Colombia deeper into a conflict that had already claimed over 30,000 lives. Efforts to reform the Colombian army's record had meager results because they didn't ever try. We now know that the CIA in 1998 predicted the military-paramilitary ties as, quote unquote, they are likely to continue, perhaps even increase, because that was the entire purpose. That's not a crystal ball. Others foresee that the conflict, which had already expanded into Venezuela and Ecuador, as they always do, because it's a strategy of tension and destabilization, will blend together and eventually include Peru and Brazil, which it did in fact do. With the passage of time, FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, has, under US pressure, became more and more like a drug-financed operation that government propagandists have depicted for over the last 2 decades. In 2002, FARC used conventional mortars and battle tactics to reclaim a large part of northern Colombia, possibly, as some U.S. analysts claim, because of the area's importance for drug trafficking. A new factor of increasing importance in the role of the Colombian drug trafficking supply of arms and other necessary logistical routes. Not all of the news on the Colombian front is equally dismal. In September 2001, ironic timing, Secretary of State Colin Powell finally placed the right-wing paramilitary AUC, Auto Defense United Colombia, on the list of foreign terrorist organizations, recognizing their role in both the rural violence and drug trafficking. General Gary Speer, who was U.S. Southcom's commander, called it the most crucial long-term threat to Colombia. But the State Department sanctions against the AUC, like suspending visas and putting other names on the visa watch list, are unlikely to do much to curb the terror campaign. Nor is the U.S. likely to prevent U.S. corporations in Colombia from working to secure their assets. As of now, all indications are that the U.S. in Colombia will remain focused on FARC, which the Colombian government in 2001 called responsible for the 2.5% of Colombian cocoa production, because the rest of it was being produced by their own assets. The more candid explanation for the U.S. efforts in Colombia could be the U.S. oil companies and their pipelines, which revolutionary armies like the FARC attacked because they know who's behind it. As, as will be discussed, the current U.S. interest in Colombia began 1 year after Occidental Oil discovered a billion-barrel oil field in 1983. It led to the National Security Decision Directive of 1986 and 1989 that authorized U.S. military presence. So again, our military is being used to guard resources for the international syndicate, and they are dying in defense of these oligarchs. The U.S. programs have aggravated the problem and not done anything to resolve them. There is a strong analogy with Vietnam. U.S. activities have aggravated the conflict in an already divided country. And this aggravation presents successive U.S. administrations with the ability to go in and make corrupt deals. The American press has called the current U.S. aid program Plan Colombia. This is a misnomer. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. How apropos. Plan Colombia was originally a white paper put forward by Colombian President Pastrana after he took office in 1998 to reduce the social turmoil in his country. It proposed an ambitious $7.5 billion program with a mix of economic, social, and military components. This was intended not just to achieve a reduction in the Colombian drug traffic, but more importantly, to establish a peace process across the entire country. As developed under Clinton, the U.S. Plan Colombia was, like so many other U.S. aid programs, 90% military. Originally, it had been meant as both an economic aid and to be much broader than just the U.S. But when the U.S. decided to take a strictly military approach, the EU backed out and said they were not going to participate in it because they knew exactly what was going on. This was after a coalition of 37 Colombian human rights and other groups signed signed a statement rejecting the plan's funds for development and appealed to Europe to come back to the table. In response to these criticisms, the Bush administration announced at a Quebec meeting in April of 2001 that it would supplement Plan Colombia with a new regional initiative designed to bolster economic growth and prosperity. To this end, President Bush proposed giving $882 million for democratic institution building, of which half would be allocated to Colombia. In other words, a bribe. In May of 2001, the State Department announced further that it would even add more funds earmarked for economic development, child survival, as they're the ones killing the people, and health. But they're harvesting drugs and they're giving them money for health programs. But the new funds, although they have silenced the vocal opposition, are not enough to correct the destabilization between U.S. social and military allocations, because that's not the purpose. The entire purpose is the destabilization. So, one is reminded of the well-intended programs that were very similar to this in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. Again, a pattern. The heart of the U.S. plan remains on the surface less than a plan than a boondoggle, without any coherent objectives for Colombia. It would be a godsend for the usual suppliers of weapons, big ag, like insecticides and stuff like that, and the military-industrial complex via helicopters, because what they were proposing was $234 million contracts for helicopters. so that people could kill more efficiently. The Pentagon is also using the occasion to establish new bases in Ecuador because they always want to use a foothold in another country, saying that they're going to use it to police another country, which they never do. They use that to destabilize the new country. And they justify the creation of moving into Ecuador because they had had to close bases in Panama. The petroleum industry, although not as vocal, clearly hopes to see an end to the disruption of their pipelines. Most importantly, the Pentagon is using Plan Colombia to steer contracts and profits to outsource parts of its infrastructure that is underfunded. For example, what they were doing back then, because I was part of the planning part of this, not Columbia or anything, just in the Pentagon. What they did is they used these operations as a way to get more defense contracts, and there were constant pressure to reduce the manpower on active duty. Obviously, a big legacy cost because of retirement and benefits. And so what they were doing was they were outsourcing staff support functions to contractors, like he names two of them, DynCorp and MPRI, which were big pieces of this. And they're basically considered private military. And so they would use these operations as an excuse to build a contract that primarily was in Colombia, but it would have this financial tail that included staff support back in the States, which then was a guise to be able to offload work off of the Pentagon books into this contract when the people weren't going to be doing anything to do with Colombia. They were just going to be doing the regular staff work of the Pentagon. It's a whole big mess. There has been a surprising consensus among students in Colombia, both in the country and going to school abroad, that U.S. plans will aggravate the country's problems. Perhaps the most important testimony came from former proponents of this counter-revolutionary approach, who were at the heart of the Reagan's efforts in Central America. One of those was a guy by the name of Andrew Messing, a former commander of the Green Beret Special Forces in El Salvador under Reagan. Quote, well, first of all, if we're going to provide aid, it should be a two-part aid. 1/4 of the aid should be military aid. 3/4 of it should be economic aid. That's the formula of success that we used in El Salvador, and that's what we have to do, unquote. Now, I'm not going to say anything in El Salvador was a success from a military or a non-military perspective until very recently, because they left death squads everywhere in El Salvador. Representative Benjamin Gilman of New York, chairman of the House International Relations Committee, was formerly one of the plan's strongest advocates. Along with Messing, he withdrew his support, saying the U.S. aid should be directed to the Colombian National Police and not the armed forces. That's a bunch of bullshit. Yeah, go ahead and send the money to the National Police, while at the same time you had the Office of Public Safety, which trained the National Police to do the exact same fucking thing that the armed forces was doing, which was terrorize, torture, and kidnap the people. These people are brainless morons. If the U.S. was serious about fighting drugs, one might expect it to target the actual military and paramilitary allies of the people actually doing the drug trafficking. But of course, we know that's the actual CIA network, and they're not going to be touched. They have been directly involved in drug trafficking, as opposed to the FARC guerrillas, who didn't do any of that stuff. In November of 1998, a Colombian Air Force plane landed at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport with a hidden cargo of 1,600 pounds of cocaine. The plane had been in the hands of the Colombian Air Force for years. Even more involved are the vicious paramilitary death squads, most of them trained in US and before Taiwanese schools, who worked hand in hand with the Colombian military and who every year accounted for 70-80% of the non-combat killings in the country. A recent Colombian government investigation collected compelling evidence through the years of 1997 to 99 that Army officers worked intimately with paramilitaries under the command of Carlos Castano, Colombia's chief paramilitary leader, whose family was major drug traffickers. In a rare television interview, Castano stated that 70% of the income for his group, the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, the AUC, came from drugs. In July 2000, Colombian police made one seizure of over 3,200 pounds of cocaine worth $53 million in the US. The police attributed the drug shipment to the AUC, not the FARC. Colombian intelligence sources estimated in 2001 that 40% of Colombian cocaine exports were controlled by the CIA's paramilitary warlords and their trafficking allies. No less an authority than the DEA has linked Castanos closely to the powerful Montoya drug trafficking network. And this is a quote. The Hina Montoya organization is the most powerful of the various independent trafficking groups that comprise the North Valley drug mafia. This organization has a well-deserved reputation for violence and is closely linked to the brutal paramilitary groups ran by Castano. The Donnie Marshall, who became Clinton's administrator of the DEA, told Congress in 1997 that the major North Valley drug mafia, of which Montoya's run the most powerful, are, quote, poised to become among the most powerful drug networking groups in Colombia, unquote. In the US press, one does not often see the official Colombian estimates as a percentage of the drug trade controlled by paramilitaries as compared to the FARC, because they always want to paint the FARC as the problem because they're controlling the rest of it. According to the Colombian government estimates in 2001, as reported in Newsweek and San Francisco Chronicle, these figures said that 40% of the paramilitary was due to the paramilitary when the FARC had only been accredited with less than 2%. Nevertheless, Plan Colombia's eradication program is focused primarily on only the area of the FARC because it's the only drug that they don't control. Again, all DEA efforts is about the competition, not about the people that are actually causing the problem. It just blows my mind. The customary defense of the U.S. eradication efforts is claim even if only 10% of the drug is stopped, it would be an improvement. So not go after the 98%. We're going to go after the 2% that we don't control. And if we get that off the streets, it's a gold. It's a feather in our cap. But the opposite actually is true. No one would be surprised after a decade of significantly increased U.S. military efforts, the drug production in Colombia hit an all-time high. Gosh, where did I see that before? Oh, in Afghanistan? Where else? Oh, in Vietnam? Yeah. Call in the military and immediately the cocaine production goes up because we're there to guard it and not destroy it. More than 10 years ago, the author, Peter Dell Scott, noted how opium production had soared over 2 decades of the CIA KMT meddling in Burma and Laos, then plummeted in 75 after the US withdrawal. Because we're doing it. He noted the same thing had happened in Afghanistan after the involvement of the CIA there. He also compared the U.S. explosion, the explosion of cocaine imports during the U.S. intervention in Central America in the 80s during the Reagan administration. As soon as you get the CIA involved in one of these operations, the drug production soars, because that's really the purpose of it. The author warned that the Bush's initiative seemed designed to open new windows of opportunity for drug trafficking in the cocaine areas like Colombia. U.S. official statistics in subsequent decade basically confirmed his prediction. As is often pointed out, Colombia had a violent history long before the U.S. intervention. This violence reflects a feudal type social structure. It is a wealthy overclass has long used the brutal tactics to displace peasants and oppress plantation workers. Now, again, this is largely due to the U.S. companies, corporate oligarchs creating that elite class that does the oppression. So he's not actually addressing systemic foreign involvement. He's only addressing the oil and the paramilitary part of the drug business. So I just want to put that out there. Just like in 1962, when America arrived in, let's see, the counterinsurgency techniques makes it worse. They band revolutionaries together into a national movement, just like what happened with the Viet Minh in Vietnam. And so again, this is something that has been pointed out repeatedly in our studies, that, and it was something that JFK noted right away, that if you're not going to engage companies or countries in economic, political, and military and treat them as peers, if you're going to push them into a subordinate relationship, you are by default pushing them into the hands of enemy forces. And he called attention to that repeatedly, like with the relationship that Eisenhower had with the Congo, and pushing Patrice Lumumba into the arms of the Soviet Union. Obviously, we did basically the same thing in every one of these countries. Push them economically, politically, use disruption, destabilization tactics. And then as soon as they make up, we attack them economically by, well, in Nicaragua's case, we mined their harbor, attack ships delivering goods to them. And then when they make that one phone call, that lifeline phone call at the time to the Soviet Union, they call him a communist and go in and kill him. In February 1962, a special warfare team headed by General William Yarborough visited the country, talking about Vietnam, for 2 weeks. The era of systematic counterterror inflicted by professionally trained paramilitary units dates from that visit, which reflected the Kennedy administration desire to move away from that, fearing that Castro might soon try to establish a brand of revolutionary, a revolution himself. Kennedy basically wanted to take a different tact. So let's see. When Yarborough visited the Colombian army, there was a comprehensive counterinsurgency plan implemented, and in response, there was a reinforcement of class repression rather than any assistance. The FARC and the ELN were first organized in 1964, basically as a repercussion of the crackdown on the people who just wanted their land back. So this Yarborough guy is the one that kind of goes in and goes, yeah, just continue to do what we've been doing. And we don't care if it turns these people off. We don't care if it pushes them into the arms of being rebels in their own country. We're just going to basically mow them over. An important ingredient in the training at Fort Bragg in counterinsurgency, as reflected in their training manual, was the organization of quote unquote self-defense units. They are basically paramilitary groups that include hunter-killer teams. The thinking and nomenclature in these field manuals were translated and cited in the Colombian Army's counter-guerrilla manual. It defined the self-defense groups as an organization of military nature made up of select civilian personnel from the combat zone who are trained and equipped to carry out actions against groups of guerrilla. You and I would call them gladio cells. In the 1970s, the CIA offered further training to Colombian and other Latin American police officers at its so-called bomb school in Texas. And guess who else all went there? All the European gladio operators. Then AID, or what we refer to as USAID now, under the CIA's so-called public safety program, taught a curriculum of terrorist concepts, terrorist devices, fabrication and functioning of devices, improvised triggering devices, incendiaries, and other bomb-making techniques. Oftentimes in these literatures, they framed the presentation of bomb making under the guise of, no, we are just talking about this because we want to teach people how to disassemble or deactivate a bomb. And so we have to teach them how it's made in order to be able to teach them how to diffuse it. And that needs to have a big eye roll, because they were never used to defuse bombs. They were used to create bombs and bomb people that the CIA wanted bombed. There was also a curriculum called Assassination Weapons, which included a discussion of various weapons which may be used by assassins. Again, I'm sure it was presented as the enemy is going to have assassins, so you need to know how to defend yourself against what they're doing. Meanwhile, you're teaching these people how to be assassins. During congressional hearings, USAID officials admitted that the so-called bomb school offered lessons not in bomb disposal, but in bomb making. Trained terrorists, counter-revolutionaries, thus became assets of the Colombian state security. They were also employed by U.S. corporations anxious to protect their workforce from unionization, as well as anti-union campaigns by Colombian suppliers that were supplying to the U.S. oligarchs there. You see? You've got the U.S. military down there guarding oligarchs' investments. Oil companies in particular have been part of the state-coordinated campaign. In June of 2001, a Colombian court heard how a U.S. security firm working for Occidental Petroleum had played a fatal role in an army raid against FARC, directing helicopter gunships that mistakenly killed 18 civilians. Many accounts of the Colombian conflict ignored the early U.S. input into paramilitary organizations, and date the Army Paramilitary Alliance from 1981. This was the year in which the country's major drug traffickers, collaborating with the Colombian Army, established a training school for a nationwide terrorist network. It was referred to as Death to Kidnappers, or MAS, M-A-S. MAS is a really, really bad organization. The traffickers put up money, and the generals contracted for Israeli and British mercenaries to come to Colombia to run the death squad school. And this is where I found out that the Israeli advisor, Eaton, was basically attached to the Colombian president and coordinated all of the training of sending the leaders in this effort back to Israel for a 1-year in residence course on how to manage this entire network. And one of the graduates of this course that Israel and the UK was teaching is Carlos Canstado, the one we were just talking about. Although the stated purpose of the network was to combat kidnapping, they were the ones actually doing the kidnapping. This is exactly what they do. It's exactly the opposite every day. Most notably, it enabled the army to frustrate the peace arrangements negotiations with FARC that tried to happen when President Benacer in the 1980s was trying to work out a peace negotiation with the FARC, and they turned around and murdered over 700 FARC members as a result of that. It was almost like it was a ploy in order to get them out in the open. There was no sign that Reagan administration, which exerted any pressure on the army or the president to stop the mass murder. The people operated with impunity until 1989, when their activities were outlawed. Human Rights Watch wrote in a report that documented how in 1991, the U.S. military and CIA personnel collaborated with the Colombian Army to institute a new system of civilian intelligence units. Despite expressed prohibition in the Army's grounding document, Order 200-0591, some of these units continued to act as paramilitary. They were armed and either with Israeli guns or U.S. equipment by the Colombian Army, despite them not being allowed to do that. In a new report in 2000, Human Rights Watch continued to document the involvement of senior Army commanders in the planning and execution of paramilitary massacres. The evidence linked half of the Colombians' 18 brigade level army to paramilitary activities. It was pervasive everywhere. The report also described a process whereby paramilitaries would bring civilian corpses to army barracks and exchange them for weapons. The officers would claim that the corpses were guerrillas killed in battle. The intent of these U.S.-backed strategies has been to drive the FARC out of the oil-bearing north and central Colombia into the Amazon region southeast of the Cordillera, which was a remote zone, and that had been going on since, for decades, and was virtually endorsed by the government of Colombia for the preponderance of the time this was going on. So basically, not only were they attempting to attack the FARC, who were the people that wanted their property back, they were evidently had property that was in the area that had been detected where the oil was, And that was another reason why they were attacking them, and had nothing to do with some minor portion of opium that were found in their areas. But they really wanted their land, the rest of their land, for oil. Incredibly, the result of another US policy, drug eradication, had been to turn this region into a major cocoa producing area. This may have been predicted when the US vigorously pursued an eradication program in the nearby Bolivia and Peru. Despite the spectacular reductions in those countries, they had basically moved it all into Colombia. And again, that can be a control mechanism. It could have been that the crops that were in Bolivia and Peru were not in their network. This is a standard way they do this. Politically, however, the situation is now very different. Coca production is now concentrated in an area under the ongoing control of a revolutionary force in the region. Thus, the end result of considerable U.S. effort has been to create a U.S. nightmare, the narco guerrilla. The term narco guerrilla was mocked by experts, but it was coined by the Casey Bush years in the Reagan administration and shown to be deceptive rhetoric by the intelligence agencies in the Latin America area. Even when Clinton drug czar General Barry McAfee renewed the war cry against narco guerrillas in 1997, the New York Times pointed out that the term had been publicly disputed by the American ambassador in Colombia, Miles, and I'm going to spell his last name, Frechtette. But today, after much effort, the narco guerrillas exist, and the Pentagon is finally engaged in a struggle that Congress will support. Aid to the Colombian army, cut off by Congress in 1994 because of human rights violations, has now been restored under this thing called Plan Colombia. American policies in Colombia, despite their stated objectives, have clearly contributed to the breakdown of social order, which again is its purpose. Colombia is indeed the largest and clearest example of a pattern seen elsewhere in the world, and clearly in many of the Central and South America countries. By giving an unbalanced aid program, you basically push them into the destabilization process. There is no doubt that some U.S. planners desired and encouraged this outcome. The 1959 RAND-sponsored conference on the role of the military in underdeveloped countries, attended by military officers from nations such as Brazil, Burma, and Indonesia. At this conference, CIA-backed U.S. academians challenged the Western bias against militaristic societies and urged officer corps to play a more active political role. The following remarks by a professor from MIT were far from the most extreme. Quote, military leaders are often far less suspicious of the West than civilian leaders because they themselves are more emotionally secure. That's just laughable. I'm sorry. Military rule itself can become sterile if it does not lead to an interest in total national development. This leads us to the conclusion that the military in the underdeveloped countries can make a major contribution to strengthening essential administrative functions, unquote. Basically, they're going in position is they're going to use the military, fund the military to destabilize the country. Within 6 years, military officers of Burma, Brazil, and Indonesia who had attended the RAND conference staged successful military coups in their home country. At the same conference, recently deposed Colombian dictator General Pinilla was classed as one of the Latin America new type reform-minded leaders making a substantial contribution towards democracy. His downfall in 1957 was attributed to his lack of schooling in administration and having stubbornly followed mistaken civilian advice. Thus, public opposition reached a point where his military colleagues had to unseat him. In other words, he wasn't playing along. He had to go. Colombia, since 1957, has been one of the few Latin American countries that has not seen a U.S.-sponsored military coup, but the Army, conscious of the Pentagon support, has behaved as an autonomous authority. Until recently, it was permitted by law to try in its own courts and almost always exonerated officers and troops accused of human rights crimes. In May 2001, the Colombian legislature was debating an anti-terrorism bill that would restore the immunity to the army. Summing up, it is not too much to say that the U.S. policies of the last 4 decades have contributed disastrously to the control of Colombia. The FARC, the paramilitaries, and the phenomenon of drug-financed revolution all can be seen as more the result of a U.S. destabilization plan than almost anywhere else. The U.S. campaigns against drugs in Colombia, which we consider in the next chapter, has contributed to the institutionalization and government acceptance of drug cartels, to the increase in Colombia of cartel-instigated violence that went along with it, as well as the increase in production. So that takes us to our next chapter, and we're going to close right there today. So that's crazy shit. All right.
Absolutely. They just keep, the more you uncover, the more dirty it gets,
Yeah, I mean, it's just more of the same crap over and over again, as you always say. So,
and it doesn't matter how low they go, and they just keep going on and on. It's like it's no big deal to them, just another day in the park. It's just so bizarre. Sorry.
It is. It is literally like they work for Satan, and they get paid by the amount of dead bodies they deliver in every country. Because there's no other way to justify what they're doing. It's just absolutely crazy. Okay. Let's see. We're going to do a shout out to, is that Lizzie? Lizzie, thank you. She gave us a donation over on Rumble. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Lizzie. Does anybody want to come up? We got any hands?
Go into the book fund, right?
Yes. I desperately need, as I'm right here waiting for people to raise their hands, opening my last book that just came today.
Just saying, I don't know if that 10 feet is going to be enough.
Oh my God.
At least I get to go down and work on tomorrow. Yay!
That's so funny. So this, one of you guys recommended this. This book that just came today is called The Jakarta Method, Washington's Anti-Communist Crusade and the Mass Murder Program That Shaped Our World. It's by Vincent Bevins. So I had been interested. I'd seen this used as a couple of references. I just never bought it. And then somebody recommended it. So I went ahead and bought it. Anyway, Carrie, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the devil is the idea that God is money. I just had a question, Colonel, because of a comment you made about feelings. Can you talk about, like, what the military trains you, I guess? I don't know. About feelings?
I didn't get any training in the military about feelings. What are you talking about?
Well, that's my point, kind of. Like, do you remember what you said when you were reading? Like, the author said something about feelings, and you were like, big eye roll. So how do they regard feelings?
How are you determining I did a big eye roll?
You said that.
When?
Oh, just when you were reading. Never mind.
I,
I'm trying to point out that is not anything to do with any military. Feelings aren't part of it. Like that's not what you're trained. Yet they were talking about that in the reading, what you were reading.
Okay, well, the actual, I don't, again, was it in a quote?
You were reading something and no.
I know, but was it the author's comments, or was I reading a quote at the time from a military person?
Oh, I don't know. I would have.
Yeah, so most of this stuff, yeah, that's why I'm saying we don't want to attribute to the military what the author is saying. So that I'm trying to figure out what exactly it was that was said. So,
well, I can re-listen and let you know later. But
okay,
I was just trying to understand if actually I was misconceiving and thinking that in the military you're trained about feelings, because I didn't think that.
So, well, there's two different aspects of that. I mean, obviously, your feelings a hill of beans when you're on a mission. You either do the mission or you resign your commission and get out. As long as it's a legal thing. Um, the feelings aspect of any endeavor that you go on in the military is a part of the psychological warfare, because that entire program is based on feelings. It is creating propaganda and eliciting a strong enough feeling that they act on it. It is the manipulation of feelings. So it's not that we're not taught about feelings and how to manipulate them and use them to your own advantage via psychological programs. Feelings have a huge factor in planning psychological warfare. So that's why I was confused as to what you were trying to get at, because there's definitely discussions in the military about the nature of people's feelings, but it is in a very cold and calculated way in order how to manipulate it in order to get them to do what you want them to do, and not in a quote unquote real feeling way. Bridget, go ahead.
I had a quick question from Renee over on Rumble from earlier, and it says, were the Green Berets involved in training some of the terrorist groups and goons?
So yes, but they were told that they were the good guys. We covered this repeatedly in talking about the people that they bring to, at the time, the School of Americas in Panama, and then when it moved to Fort Benning, they also have brought an entire cadre of terrorists into Fort Bragg. But the military is going, because both of those bases have huge CIA presence on them as part of the school system. And they are told under quote unquote CIA gained intelligence that the people that they are bringing in, just like I was just talking about, in the scenario in Colombia, the FARC, again, my entire career, it was drilled into my head that the FARC were the terrorist. The FARC was not the terrorist at all. And when you are taken into Colombia to conduct training, or Colombians are brought into Fort Bragg or Fort Benning or wherever to receive training, you are told that these people that you are training are combating the FARC, who are the terrorists. So absolutely, we train the bad guys all the time. I would be surprised if we trained any good guys. because we are relying on the CIA to make the delineation of who the good guys and bad guys are, and they are 100% protecting the people that they control and trying to kill the ones that they don't. Paul, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel, I just wanted to ask you a question about, I was listening to a couple of spaces about the JFK files, and I was listening to a gentleman named Colonel Tim Kirk. Are you familiar with him?
I am.
Okay, I don't know how you feel about him, but some of the stuff he was saying was making a lot of sense. And, he agreed with the statement of we should abolish the CIA. Now, yesterday I was watching the Benny Johnson show, and he starts his show with cutting the CIA. It was with AI, but abolishing the CIA and cutting it into 1,000 pieces. So my question to you is, knowing everything you know about Operation Gladio and all this, do you think it's a fair thing to get behind to say abolish the CIA? Or does the CIA, would it actually kind of hurt ourselves to do that too quickly because maybe there is some good out of the CIA? Or do you think it's just all bad and abolishing it would be a net positive?
Okay, this is an easy one. Let's see if I can knock this out of the park. The CIA, since the day that it was set up, has never, ever worked for the United States government nor the United States citizens. It was prior to the end of World War II. The OSS was filled with people out of corporate America. The Dulles brothers, the Wild Bill Donovan, who married into a massive amount of money in Buffalo, New York. All of the people in the OSS were the oligarchs and their minions that got this quote unquote intelligence stink on them as a result of World War II. They are the guard dogs of the oligarchs. All we did after World War II was take all of those Dobermans for the oligarchs and fold them into an organization that before World War II, they had to pay for this private intelligence on their own. So this was a brilliant move on the oligarchs' part. They set up, using Truman, the CIA, the precursor to it, but let's just call it the CIA, and offloaded off of their expense account the intelligence function that for the last several hundred years, businesses back to the East and West Indies companies and all of them had carried their own intelligence and some of them their own private armies as they went around invading countries. They took all of that with a standing army and a standing intelligence function and put that on the taxpayers to fund it. And they have used, especially the special forces piece of our military, but all of our military in the instances of Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan twice, Iraq, they have used them as a police force to protect the oligarchs' resources. And they made us pay for it as taxpayers. The CIA has been the intelligence function that existed in the private sector up until World War II. Every fucking piece of it has to be destroyed. Is that good?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. And I felt like that was the answer, but I just wanted to confirm it with you because I want to get it trending, right? I mean, if everyone in the MAGA Maha movement were to start saying abolish the CIA and it becomes catchy, Trump will hear it. I mean, he's obviously open to shutting down corrupt parts of government, and I think this is the perfect time for us to maybe get behind that message. So I just wanted to know before I go out there and I really put my neck out there to be a part of that. I just wanted to kind of get your blessing on that.
The only thing that I would ask you to do is when you say abolish the CIA, also say research Operation Gladio. If you think for 1 minute that the CIA, any piece of it can be left, research Operation Gladio.
Yeah, I will. And I shared your post that you asked to like games. That was an amazing thread you did that you were sharing. One quick thing, and I don't want to get off topic, but I always care a little bit about Nicaragua, is that the Sandinistas were definitely bad. I'm not saying that the Contras and us getting behind them was good or anything. I still am trying to find out more about that with you when you do a space on that or if you cover it. But I do know for a fact that the Sandinistas are oppressive, and like Nicaragua's been under an oppressive regime, particularly since 2018. And they got people there that they don't want to come to our country, but they are actual asylum-seeking political refugees. Is that something? I mean, is there anything we can do there? Because they are an unarmed population going up against a very oppressive regime over there.
So I'm going to stay, and you're right. I do need to do that. I do have it on my to-do list. I will set up a space to talk about Nicaragua, and I'm going to go dig out all of the books, because I have two specific books that talks about the corruption in the media, what the business interests were, and what they did to spin the narrative of the Sandinistas. Now, I want to be perfectly clear to your point. Whenever I say that the Contras were the terrorist, I am not endorsing the other alternative to the government. Just like when I said that we spent the last, I don't know, prior to World War II, but 40 years after World War II attacking China. I'm not endorsing Mao. I'm just saying that the CIA and the United States has a deserved, horrible reputation within the government of China, because they knew the entire time that we were backstopping Chiang Kai-shek, who was launching all of these attacks, and where he couldn't reach, like in Tibet and where the Uyghurs are. We just brought them into the United States and into the nearby stands and trained them to be terrorists too, so we could put them back in China and just basically cuts death by 1,000 cuts. That does not mean I like Mao at all. That just means that I'm addressing the behavior of my government.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and no, that's why I want to hear what you have to say about it. Like, I mean, there's some ties there. As you see, my last name is Pastora. One of the Contras there was Eden Pastora, who was like I don't know, like a cousin of my part of the family, and he had kind of regarded, people look back at him as a little bit of a hero, but us and our family know he's a dirtbag. Like, he's not a good guy. So, however, the Sandinistas suck. So, like you said, there's a lot of gray, and that's why I just love to hear your information, because it helps kind of get through all that. I hope you can remember me. I know you know so many people, but when you do the Nicaragua space, I just hope I don't miss that, because my father did surgery on Chamorro, the president there. When she had cataracts, they called my dad to go down there with Doctors Without Borders, and he did cataract surgery on the president of Nicaragua on an airplane. So, like, we just got some ties there, and I'd love to get some clarity on all that.
Are you familiar with the Chamorro Foundation and what they're doing down there with the CIA right now?
My mother would be. I'm more worried about the United States, so I let my mom handle that stuff.
The Chamorro is the vehicle into Nicaragua to destabilize that for the CIA. That's where all of the USAID money goes, into that foundation.
I don't doubt it, because everyone in Nicaragua knows that there is no good side. There is no one that cares about the people, and everyone who gets elected ends up just stealing from them. I mean, it's insane. Like, it's literally one of the most corrupt countries in the whole world. Yeah,
that unfortunately, I would tend to agree with you on that. And it's sad, because it's a beautiful country.
Oh, it's gorgeous. I know so many people, and I've been there many times. It is phenomenal. But yes, everyone there is kept in poverty, and the government never works for them. And since 2018, I mean, they literally, the Miss Universe was from Nicaragua, and she's not allowed into the country. Isn't that insane?
Yeah, I've heard that. That is insane. That is insane. Yes. Okay. Did someone else have something?
There was one question, and it was from your favorite Seaweed Sally.
Okay.
She wanted to know, and this was earlier in the beginning, what year of the Reagan administration was that, or do you know?
Of when they were dealing with Colombia?
When you were talking about your thread, I believe.
Oh. No, that was when he was the governor of California.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. So one of the guys that was implicated in the assassination was a California resident. And Jim Garrison, who was the only person that actually did a real investigation into the assassination when he charged Clay Shaw with being an accomplice to the assassination, subpoenaed this guy on charges. He actually preferred charges, not just a subpoena. Of this guy being involved with the Clay Shaw operation that was now living in California, and he may have been there the whole time and just came to New Orleans. And he wanted him extradited to stand trial. And Reagan refused to extradite him. You just had, I mean, obviously this was years later, but it had to do with finding out who killed our president, and Ronald Reagan refused to extradite him. Don't anyone ever tell me that Ronald Reagan was a good guy. I'm sorry, he was not. Andy, go ahead.
Hi there, Colonel Connor, Stella, Bridget. How are you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. I just have a quick question and then a follow-up. I just wanted to ask, just follow up from the previous gentleman spoke about breaking up the CIA. Would it not be, with the release of the JFK files, that's enough to show that has to be done? I mean, JFK was talking about, breaking it up into millions of pieces or whatever. And I just wondered the sentiment there. I haven't been able to keep up so much with all of the latest on X, but I just wondered what's happening out there in terms of the release of the JFK files and the CIA.
Well, I mean, different people have different takes on it. I know there is a very large contingent of people that the only thing that they are looking at as it relates to the files is the implications for Israel. Now, obviously, I have a completely different take on not anything to do with Israel, but on the actual JFK assassination, only because it basically worldwide, there were people everywhere that wanted him dead because he was going to be on the side of freedom and try to stop all of these different operations. And so there were lots of people that didn't hold him in high regard. And a large portion of those people were in the CIA and the oligarchs that we talk about all the time. And as a result of that, there's a whole lot more in there. And of course, the biggest one today, this morning, was with the U2. And that literally blew me away. Okay, so I'm trying to go back and find that post that I did about hold on just a second, about the U2. Unfortunately, I posted way too many things between now and then in order to be able to find it quickly. But
does that have anything to do with the band U2? Or
no, it's the U2 aircraft. And so, Paul, was this the same Paul? Because that guy's name was Paul too. I'll have to bring him back up. I want to know if that's the same Paul.
I'm working on finding it too.
He's right there. I got him. One of the followers by the name of Paul posted a sheet of the declassified documents, and the first paragraph he had highlighted said something about Israel, and the bottom one said something about Israel. So I read the one in the middle that has no highlighting on it at all, and it's about the Oswald working on the U2 program and the fact that there were Taiwanese flying the damn U2. And I'm like, wait a minute. Wait a freaking minute. The U2 was classified for like ever. And you're telling me that we had Chiang Kai-sheks Taiwanese people coming to America to go to train on how to fly the U-2, and that we've got them pre-positioned, which this part I knew, in Japan and also apparently in Taiwan. And I'm like, again, major head blown moment for me. So I have a very good friend that flew the U-2, and I'm immediately, like at 7:30 in the morning, texting him going, what in the hell? Read the unhighlighted paragraph on this. This came out in the recent JFK. And he turns around and tells me that, oh yeah, at the evidently they have like a honor wall in the squadron, because there's only one real base, Beale Air Force Base, which is where you go through all your training to be a U-2 pilot. And they've got like this Hall of Fame that has all of the pilots on it. And he sent me a picture of the one that has his name on it, because they do it by the year you get your full qualifications to fly the U-2. And if you're a foreign pilot, in parentheses beside your name, it tells you what country they're from. And I'm like, he goes, yeah, I remember seeing Taiwan. There is a country. And I'm like, what the hell? So anyway, and of course he didn't know. And again, this is the problem. He had no idea that Chiang Kai-shek was like for 40 years was the drug supplier to the CIA. We don't know any of this stuff, or we didn't. And so I'm like, yeah. You know why they were flying the U-2 over China? So that they could attack them and to make sure that they could have clear shipping, whatever protection for all their drug trafficking. I'm again, my mind was just blown.
Along with the entity of the international syndicate. And I wanted to bring up a second question. So yeah, I would group, all those that were, against JFK is basically, what you've defined as the international syndicate. And maybe they're not all, totally, in all the same clubs, but ultimately they are all aligned. And that's, what I'm understanding. Today, so it looks like, I'll just give a bit of news here in Canada. It looks like there's going to be an election soon. And just a comment and then leading to a question. The leader of so I'm going to be running in this election under the PPC, the People's Party of Canada, and the leader of the PPC was actually interviewed today by Alex Jones on InfoWars. It was pretty entertaining, but a lot of the talk and their opening are, like Alex, he's always talking about the globalists. So and so the current mainstream political parties are pretty much, you could link them all to globalists in the sense that, they're all, some more than others are being apparent, but you can see when they're all following the same narrative out there about, in Canada, they're saying, okay, Trump bad, tariffs bad, we got to do counter tariffs and all these things, which, you wouldn't think of just talking and negotiating and trying to see what, so the only person who actually is speaking against the narrative is Maxime Bernier, the leader. And so he was on Alex Jones today. But the question is, like, I thought you said you had some stuff to talk about Canada, about the infiltration of the globalists, because it seems like we've been always, there, or the international syndicate. We've been on this steady trajectory to that, and it's really obvious how the media has a stronghold on the people. You have people taking emotional reactions to to Trump and they're saying, okay, I'm not buying anything made in the U.S. and all this stuff. They're just taking this emotional ride on what the media is feeding them. And it seems like absurd, but it's something that we saw in the pandemic as well, like how they pushed people to do things that really are not not at all logical, or someone who's thinking without being guided by their emotions. So the question is, do you have anything there that you're going to be talking links to Canada? I thought you were working on something, but and now would be a good time to bring it out, because likely they're going to call an election, and well, tomorrow, and we'll be going into campaigns, and yeah, although not too many people are hearing alternative media, but it is getting through. I think slowly Canadians are realizing, although we're different than Americans in the sense that we trust the government, and we don't have as much of a like skin in the game to protect your country like the Americans do. We sort of are more passive, but I think people are just had enough. But it's going to be hard to push them into voting for their best interests. So I don't know if you have anything there.
Well, the only stuff, I don't have anything that's recent. What I had said is that Canada comes up in the form of a player, a partner in the international syndicate, as a place where subsidiary companies go to reside outside of the purview of the U.S. And I'll give you an example. Like someone had mentioned earlier today about the, well, I had included this in my response to Candace Owens' total bad take that she just recently did on a recent video about Island Dulles and all of those. I don't know who fed her that information, but 90% of what she said was absolutely not true. And that was unfortunate, because I do like her reporting. But she basically made the accusation that they were setting up front companies to do illicit things. And not that he didn't do that when he was in the CIA. He most certainly did. But she was using that in reference to setting up subsidiary units in the United States during the lead up and during the war for companies that were in Germany. And they did that in other countries as well, but they did it for a different reason. Some of the companies that were set up as subsidiaries to German companies in the United States was actually confiscated as basically, war. What I forget what the name of it was called, but basically Trading with the Enemies Act, that type of a thing. And so they eventually got those companies back, and they went on about their merry life. But that's the stuff that Prescott Bush was involved in. Those companies were not front companies. They were real companies. They were doing real crap in the United States as a subsidiary of IG Farben, of some of the banks and stuff like that. That's far different than an actual, like the companies that Edwin Wilson set up for shipping. They did real shipping, but the only shipping they did was for the CIA. That's a front company. That's very different. And a lot of the companies in America, when they want to do shady shit, they will set up a subsidiary, or the senior incorporation will be in Canada, and they'll have a subsidiary here, and then they do shady shit. And all of the shady stuff, if it's looked at from the US, is in Canada, and then vice versa. So I've seen some of those, but none of that is recent. It really goes back to just kind of the overall collusion between the Canadian government and the Royal Mounted police, whatever you call them, and your intelligence functions, along with the CIA. And all of them is from a very historical perspective. That doesn't mean some of the companies are still not around. It's just the information that I go off of is from a historical perspective. Almost every,
yeah, I think that's very true.
Almost every mining company in Canada is one of the oligarchs and tied to Operation Gladio. They use the Gladio operators to protect those mining interests. And you remember the one that we uncovered in Haiti that had Hillary Clinton's brother as one of the employees of the Canadian company that they were using basically to hide the Haitian mining concession that had been granted illegally, by the way, because you're not allowed to mine in Haiti, for gold. And so those types of things go on where they go down there and they try to bribe and coerce government officials to give them mining concessions. Canada has been involved in a lot of that.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Like, I guess you'd be suspicious if the company has like operations in Laos or LAOS, Laos.
Laos, yeah,
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 yeah, or other countries like that where I guess the CIA and they were deep inside, all those conflict zones, and yeah, like you spoke a lot about in Vietnam and the Far East countries there.
yeah. All right, who do we got? Zen, go ahead.
Hello, Colonel. I wanted to ask you a question. You were mentioning German companies and industry in the United States prior to and during World War II. What I was wanting to know was, because during World War II, the United States started up the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, which was active in Burma and Southeast Asia. A few units that trained local guerrilla fighters against the Japanese and were highly successful. And then that was a good intelligence unit. And then that morphed into the CIA, I believe. I was curious, you mentioned Prescott Bush and pre-World War II, World War II. Was that some kind of other predecessor to the CIA?
So I take it you're kind of new here?
Well, I've been here a few times, but...
Okay, so basically, during World War II, the Hitler and Reinhard Gehlen had come up with a concept called stay-behind units. This was a very well-known tactic dating back to the Boer Wars in Africa. So it wasn't like a new thing. And these capabilities was used not just by Reinhard Gehlen, but they basically showed up in the Jedburghs of the British, and because the British is the one that discovered them down being used by the Boers in South Africa, like 40 years before that. And so it was a tactic, a military tactic that was used, and basically under the principle that prior to the conflict, you were going to go and stash weapons in different places, normally buried in wooded areas. And then you have maps of where all of these caches of weapons are. And if you are to lose ground, the people who are presumably civilians, these are not military, these are like militias, would then, as the military of the opposing force comes through their area, they fall in on these caches of weapons and then attack them from the rear. So that relieves some of the stress on the frontline people. So that's kind of just tactically the way that operates. Now, because Gehlen had spent so much time in all of the conquered areas that Hitler had taken, which included France, Czechoslovakia, Romania, all of those different countries, they had began, Otto Skorzeny was his trainer for this, they had been setting up all of these capabilities. Well, his bargaining chip at the end of World War II was making a deal with Dulles that he would basically, in exchange for his freedom, tell him where all of these units were, and they would jointly have command and control, and they would set up a function in NATO to manage them for the future, because of course it was under the guise of they'll all be used for anti-communist activities. Now, if you want to go over to Southeast Asia, basically what was happening there is in both Korea and Vietnam, these types of capabilities was set up because the US had already pre-decided that Kim in Korea, the current Kim's dad, was not going to be in charge of a country called Korea. So they were going to do whatever they could to keep that country divided and to keep some part of it under the control of the West. And they were mandated to have an election in order to and then get the hell out. They refused to do that. Not only did they refuse to do that, they planted stay-behind units in the northern area, which was under the jurisdiction. You know how, like, at the end of the war, they'll assign geographic, like what we did in the no-fly zone in northern Iraq. We gave part of it to the Brits and part of it, and then the U.S. was the overall commander. Well, in Korea, they had given the northern sector to the Soviets, who, by the way, was our ally, and we had, in the U.S., the southern part. Well, the commanders, namely MacArthur, had decided that they were going to use the opportunity to make the Soviet Union the quote unquote boogeyman. So they set up stay behind units in the southern area of the northern sector. And then they created false flags that initiated or justified the South going into that northern sector and started skirmishing. And it got bigger and bigger. And MacArthur just made the decision, some say without prior approval, that he's going all the way to the northern border. And he starts pushing forward. And under the guise, many people believe, to reinsert Chiang Kai-shek, who had just been kicked out of China by Mao, and because he's going to be their big drug producer, so they can sell all of the illicit drugs and pay for their covert operations that Reinhard Gehlen just set up. And so this whole thing was a coordinated effort, but they really wanted Chiang Kai-shek back in China because China had tons of areas to grow opium, and they had 7/8 of the world opium supply leading into and during World War II. Depending on, which person is estimating these numbers, it varies a little bit, but it was a shit ton of opium. And so they wanted Chiang Kai-shek back in there because Mao was eradicating it all. You were not allowed to have any drugs in China at all under Mao. And so they wanted Chiang Kai-shek back in there really, really bad. So when that didn't work out, they temporarily put them in Burma. They set these units up in Burma. And Taiwan was Formosa at the time. And so they just picked Chiang Kai-shek and his KMT military up and plop him down on Formosa and call it Taiwan. And they then began throughout all of Asia setting up this same infrastructure. And so if you're going to do this and you're going to use it exclusively for domestic terror, which they did, in order to control the populations, like the Bologna train station, the bank that was in downtown, I think it was Milan, the fast forward, the Spanish railroads that were blown up, trains, cars, the tube in England, which is their subway. They've been doing domestic terror events with these Gladio cells since the end of World War II. They were used exclusively for domestic terror. And so when you look at all of that, that kind of basically describes Operation Gladio. That's the very definition of it. And the reason why you generically call it Operation Gladio is because in Italy in the late 1980s, there was a lot of people going, what the hell's going on with these domestic terror events, and what's going on? They blew a gas and oil guy that owned like the biggest gas and oil company because he had just flown to Libya and wanted to give them a concession of 50-50 for Italy, and BP and everybody else freaked out because they were giving like 86-14. So that was going to screw up everything, and they blew his airplane up and killed him. And so as all of these domestic terror events start happening, people start talking. And a reporter, one of the very first reporters that ever reported anything about Gladio, he was assassinated. And anybody that tried to investigate it, prosecutors, were assassinated in Italy. And so in 1990, the Prime Minister Andreotti got up in front of everybody and said, yeah, we know we've got Operation Gladio. It's ran out of NATO. CIA is basically the kind of the lead cheerleader for it. And this is all the stuff that I've uncovered over the last couple of years. And it's crazy shit.
Thank you. That's a great explanation.
Sure. Let's see. Guru, go ahead.
Good evening, good whatever it may be around the world, guys. How are you? Listen, Colonel, just listen to, what information you do have, which is just incredible, I must say once again. And I actually put that on a post this morning, not trying to blow hot air up your skirt, but yeah, you are certainly all over this. We put out a thing in Australia, and it's on my website, guys. I put a link, or I put our website down in the pill. But we put out a thing called witness statement. And what we done, and I'm just talking on exposure, and I've got to hang with me, Colonel. I've got something for you here. It's called witness statement. About 3.5 weeks to a month ago, I premiered it, and we put it out in Australia. And I think these numbers, most of them would be Australia. But guys, what it was a 2.5-hour documentary that's been broken into 9 sections that you can go and look at, and it gives you all the evidence of the COVID debacle. And we have now we served it on all the police stations, Australia-wide, all the justice systems, everything. We now have an event number for New South Wales, and we have an event number for South Australia to look into the criminal acts of the COVID tyranny. So we've actually got the police operating over here now. What I'm saying to you, Colonel, is I know it's hard to do and it takes a bit of work, but maybe a documentary, Gladio, the thing that took down the Western world or something like that, and actually put a little video together and get it out there, Colonel, because this is a time of exposure and people are looking for information. So maybe to do a bit of a documentary like that, and we can all share it and pump it out, do premieres, boom, 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 and get you put on the map a little bit more, which keeps you safer for what you're doing. And number one, but number two is we can educate a lot more people that way if we, we all get together and do a premiere of Gladio, you know what I mean, and bang it. I'm just wondering your thoughts.
So, Guru, my thoughts are, I would love to do that. I have all the material. I have had lots of people talk to me about doing that. I don't have the skills to do it. I don't have the money to do it. And everybody that talks about doing it never does it. Just recently.
Okay, leave it with me. Leave it with me. I'll see if I can find some help. You know what? We got 27 million people in Australia. We've had 1 million hits, guys. 1 million views in 3 weeks. 3.5
Yeah, that's
weeks,
awesome.
1 million views.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think that if we were able to do something like that, it would be amazing. But again, I don't have the technical capabilities of doing it. And the people that have reached out, it's always, oh, well, we'll have to do a fundraiser and we'll get back with you or whatever. And honestly, just set that aside for a second. There has been, and I will share this with you guys, and I am not, unlike my normal self, I'm not going to name names. I will eventually, but I'm not going to right now because it's not necessarily completely off the table. But there have been people that is bigger than any show that I've ever been on that have indicated that they wanted to have me on their show, and then nothing. I don't know if they go look at my page because normally that's a word of mouth thing where somebody goes, oh my God, there's somebody that has, I don't know. People are afraid of Operation Gladio. They're afraid to talk.
I do, Colonel. And what's going on there is I'd be very suspect of those bigger people who want to have you on a show and then in the background got said, you don't go near this topic. That's what's happening, I'd say.
I would assume that as well, Guru. I don't have any facts to back that up. And I think people, when they start digging into off the top of the head, if somebody just tells you a little bit like that little spiel that I just gave, you're like, oh my God, everybody needs to know about that. And then you start looking into the actual meat and potatoes of Operation Gladio, and you realize that tons of people do get murdered that talk about it. and they just mysteriously go missing. There are a lot of people that scares the hell out of. And so in each and every case, you guys can tell the people whose shows I've been on, like Alpha Warrior and on Badlands, they'll put it all out there. They will give you a venue and let you talk. But that is a very rare thing. And it's not because I am not vocal. It's not because I don't go on those people's things and say things to them. But even in our own realm, and I'll again, I'm going to say this, and I don't give a shit if I piss people off. I have been invited into what you guys would recognize as Patriots DMs. And they will have a group, like 30 or 40 people in there that they just kind of, throughout the day, they post comments. Normally it's used to boost. Like if you put a post out and you want other people to promote it, you cut and paste it and put it in this DM. I have just recently, only because this was brought to my attention, went in there and looked at how many people, I didn't even know you could do this, by the way, but somebody showed me how to do it. You can go in to your post and look at how many people either liked it or reposted it with comment. Almost no one in those rooms, in those private DMs, ever repost anything that I post. And supposedly, those are all the people that want all of this stuff exposed. I don't know why that is. It is very, very frustrating to me. Anyway, that is what it is. It does seem to be a very interesting. I do know that some of the people that's offered to do this are currently working on a fairly, at least in one case, a very, very big project that they're almost done with. That may still be out there, which is why I don't want to name names, because I don't want to burn bridges. This topic is too important to me. And I've spent, and I know I talk, I'm speaking on behalf of Bridget as well. We have spent so much of our last few years doing this that I don't want to burn the bridges if the opportunity provides itself to be able to expose everybody to this. Because you're right, Guru, it has to get out there. People have to know what their government has done in their name. So anyway, thank you for that. And congratulations, Guru. That is phenomenal. You are a rock star.
Well, there was other people behind it, and they self-funded it. I done the promotion of it, and got involved with it. We've now got flyers out there. We had 60,000 flyers come down to my town the other day. People pitched in the money. 60,000 flyers, guys, going out. That's just in Wollongong, going out into letterboxes about the witness statement and where they can see it and what's gone on with it. So we're hoping for more event numbers. We can get an event number in every state. Then we push to the next level. So, but look, the exposure works, guys. This is, and it's all in God's timing, Colonel. It'll work for you. Okay, it's not your timing. All right, we're in a spiritual war here. I'm not,
I agree. I agree.
So, yeah.
Guru, I have a question. Because I don't know if Colonel Towner knows, Bossy, but definitely, they might have some stuff to talk about, because of all these Gladio things that are going on and stuff. And also, would you possibly DM, I don't know if you're still close to Captain Kyle, but it seems like a lot of people that follow him are very aware of things and they question. And I think that it would be very eye-opening for that to be kind of, maybe she can go on to their platform too. I don't know, with all of you guys. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm quite willing to do that, mate. I can reach out. I got a few things to do today, but over the weekend I can reach out to a few people. And look, I had you on our New Year's Eve show.
I know.
We haven't really done a show in Australia, so I think we probably ought to get that organised too for next week. And we'll do a special on Operation Gladio if you can spare the time.
I can always spare the time. And I brag about being on your radio show all the time. I loved it.
Nah, cool. Look, it's what we've got to do, guys. This is a world united event, okay? We come into these spaces, we can talk the talk, but, like I've put out on a post to Clive Palmer, who wants to get involved in the Australian political scene now. I said to him, well, Clive, you can talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? Because the walk you're about to go on is a real crazy one, man. If you run for this and actually ping it and get it, you know what I mean? So, again, you got to be able to walk the walk, guys, and, not just talk the talk. And I'm not having to dig at anyone. I'm just saying that's what our job is. Our job is to expose what is going on. And the better we can do it, and the more we can come together and do it, nationally and also around the world, we're in trouble. The world's in trouble and Australia's in trouble. And, we need to move, and we need to move quick because they are steamrolling us at the moment. We're winning the information war, but the background war with the CDCs and the digital IDs and locking everything up, we just put on it. Our first 15-minute city was announced on the news yesterday, I think it was. I put it on the show last night. And the people were falling into it. They got these guys on their 70-year-old now. Oh, look, I'm ordering my next loaf of bread online. They're just so naive to what's going on. And that's why education is just so critical at this time. I'll wrap it up there. Thanks, Colonel.
Thanks, Guru. Carrie, go ahead. Carrie?
Sorry. I had a question for you about Canada, and maybe I'm misconceiving this, but because of Five Eyes, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, us, and England, Britain, I thought that basically they're a commonwealth. They are called the Commonwealth of the British, but I thought that was really basically the truth. Like, they have no autonomy in my mind. They are super hyper tethered, as are we. I think we're like a colony still, but what's your take on that? Because whenever I hear people talking about, what can be done to Canada, they're a constitutional monarch.
Andy? Andy. Are you still with us, Andy? I don't know if he could.
Yeah, I'm still here. Just have to grab the phone.
Did you want to answer that?
Yeah, constitutional monarchy. I think we're still there. I believe we are still there. I believe so back when Trudeau Senior was around, they repatriated the Charter of Rights, and at that time, we all thought, okay, we're now in control of ourselves, but really, that proved to be worth nothing, with all the COVID stuff that happened. And we've just proven that was all a farce. So the current mainstream politicians, they're all, talking that talk and continuing to keep the wool over our eyes that we're independent. But no, we're fully, like serfs under Britain, under the Commonwealth or whatever. That's my understanding. But yeah, and I know for sure that when you become, when you're elected into the Parliament, you make an oath to the Queen and now the King, and swear an oath. And if you're in the cabinet, you also swear an oath of secrecy. So these people who are elected and become cabinet ministers, you're not going to get anything out of them, if they know anything that's abuse. So yeah, definitely we're still under the British crown.
Thank you, Andy. All along, go ahead.
Hi. Couple things relating to your earlier emphasis on mining, Colonel. I think that's really at the core of the JFK assassination. We see it during the JFK administration in the sense of these oligarchs, these Gilded Age folks like Nelson Rockefeller and Jock Whitney, Whitney with nickel mines in Cuba, right? Just having this, using the U.S. government, Defense Department stockpiling for commodities, for basically as a means of rigging global commodities markets, right? And this actually was, exposed in mainstream media by Washington Post writer Larry Stern, who Sterling Seagrave was assassinated in 1980 when he was 50. But and then right after, so we see this hubris of the Gilded Age good old boys who perceive JFK as like new money. You're not in the club, and many others perceived him that way as well. Just getting pissed at JFK's, because JFK called out the stockpiling scandal. And then what do we see after the coup? We see these enormous changes in the global mining industry. Brazil, Indonesia, and Congo. These are market changing moves between 1964 and 66 that just completely change the global mining industry from national to an international cartel syndicate.
True.
In mining. And I think that's so, when you think about mining as a basis of all production, it's so important to look at the mining industry between 64, especially in 66, the year of living dangerously, when Obama's mom was working for USAID in Indonesia, doing some mop-up operations and becoming worthy of gestating a future president of the United States.
Well, he was already born. She wasn't gestating him.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, well, nursing him then. I also just wanted to comment earlier on your point about the U2 incident in Tokyo and Oswald. You're correct. He had seventh level security clearance because he was guarding the U2 spy plane, and as we know, that was the CIA's baby. It was their project from 1953 on, when they enlisted the Polaroid Corporation to develop the camera for the U2 spy plane. So for him to have been guarding the U2 spy plane is just like, again, Oswald could kick Waldo's ass in a ubiquity contest because he was everywhere. And of course, I know I mentioned this before, but I just want to plug this book of this guy, the book called Hit List. It's such an unputdownable and amazing book. It has a dumb-looking cover, but it's amazing. And their section on Oswald being in Japan at Etsugi Air Force Base guarding the U-2 spy plane becomes especially relevant in their coverage of Gary Francis Powers, who, as I've mentioned earlier, that's the U-2 pilot. He survived just U-2 getting shot down, but in 1978, he was on a San Diego radio station, and he's saying, "Wow, isn't this wacky that when I was shot down in the U-2 incident, there was a Marine named Lee Harvey Oswald who happened to have been guarding the U-2 with extreme top secret information. And on the Friday when Oswald first tried to defect, let's put that in quotes because, he made it clear or hinted that he had secrets to offer the Soviet Union, and they knew about his, work guarding the U-2 at Etsugi. And so going back to Francis Powers in 78, he says, "Wow, isn't it wacky that Lee Harvey Oswald was guarding the U-2 spy plane and was in the Soviet Union when I was shot down in the U-2 incident?" And then 2 weeks later, Mr. Gary Francis Powers who survived the U-2 incident is shot down. And again, those are flying around 60,000 feet, where the sky becomes the undecided vote, whether black or blue. Same Gary Francis Powers is shot down from a traffic help. I'm sorry, he's not shot down, but he dies in a helicopter plane crash doing traffic helicopter for either KNBC or KTLA in sunny Los Angeles, California. And again, read hit list. It's unputdownable.
All right. Thank you. All right. Who else we got? Guru, go ahead.
Yeah, Colonel, I had the chance to actually interview Lee Harvey Oswald's handler / partner back from that time. So would you be interested in that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll line it up. I'll let you know. But yeah, I've been offered the chance to interview her. So I thought it'd be a fascinating story, and you've got more information than I would have on that side of things. So I would love to have you there. Wow,
that would be fabulous.
Well, apparently she's moving every 90 days. So anyway, that's what I've been told with some of my conversations over there with some people I know in America. And yeah, so I think there was an interview. I'll have to go and have a look. I think there was an interview done with her. I was going to be done with her. I got up at 3:30 the other morning, but maybe they fuzzled out or something, and it didn't happen because it was meant to be alive and broadcasted everywhere. Maybe she got a bit worried. I don't know. But anyway, the opportunity's there. I'll get onto it, Colonel.
All right. Thank you, Guru. Zen, go ahead.
Yeah, as long as we're talking about Kennedy, I was in Mario's space the other day, and I got to talk, and somebody had brought up the fact that Oswald went down to the Mexico City to try to get into the Russian embassy, and they were acting like that was new information. That's old information.
It's very old.
And yeah, I'm not following any of this. I'm going to wait till it's sifted down. I ain't got time to deal with 80,000 pages and stuff, but I've read books and stuff. But I wanted to make a comment concerning JFK. JFK was a war hero in World War II.
Yeah.
He had a very dangerous, they called them expendables. He was on a PT boat, patrol torpedo, a little craft, and they'd go out barge hunting, and these ships were very inexpensive compared to like a destroyer. So there was high attrition rate, and his destroyer got sliced in half at night by a Japanese destroyer. And he was an excellent swimmer, and he swam several miles to an island and got a whole. There's a movie out. This is what I wanted. If you haven't seen the movie PT 109, it was released in like 62. It's a great movie, and it details Kennedy's war experience. And if you watch that movie, you will understand why Kennedy hated war and wanted peace. And I think that's a great place to start and that's a good movie also. Thank you.
That's a great idea. Thank you, Zen. I appreciate that. I see the biggest picture. Your turn.
Hi, Colonel.
Hi.
Thank you for letting me speak. So I have a couple of questions. Of course, both questions are based on speculation. So regarding JFK and Oswald, so we all know that our governments have been infiltrated by very bad people. So my thinking is that just like our governments have been infiltrated by bad people, isn't it possible that the CIA got infiltrated by good people? And I was wondering, because there is something that I saw in a documentary and also in some documents that were released in these files that kind of led me a little bit to believe that maybe it's possible that Oswald was I'm doing air quotes when I say a good guy, infiltrating the CIA and perhaps maybe giving information to JFK. And of course, they used him as a patsy. We all know that. And there's speculation that Biden, actually, as a young Biden, was resembled Oswald. And then, of course, that Bush was there that day. So, I mean, it's all kind of crazy. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that. And then the second question, which brings us to today, is with all these, I don't even want to say Islamic protests, okay, that are going on across the country and chanting death to America. I was just wondering if you thought maybe they were kind of an arm of the CIA. So those are my two questions.
So the first one, I don't speculate. I think it detracts from the information that I do put out that's factual. So I'm not going to comment on that. I would encourage everybody to stick with the facts. The facts are crazy enough without going out on limbs and trying to create additional what ifs. So that's just me. I don't do that type of speculation. As far as the destabilization efforts that are ongoing, yeah, you can't really characterize what's going on the college campuses as Islamic in nature. Are there some people that are Islamic in those? Yes, but there is also, just like with the BLM, almost all of the BLM activists were white. They weren't even black. Most of these, the same thing with Antifa. You know, you get these little tight, skinny jean wearing soy boys out there, and these crazy ass women that are like literally crazy, and creating basically terror events. And all it, to me, from an ongoing perspective, after all of the research that I've done, any suspected domestic terror event, the very first thing I'm going to look at is the CIA. Because we know that in over 90 successful times, the overthrow of a government has been done with the CIA's involvement. They've attempted over 400 of them, one guy recorded in his book, but 90 of them has been successful. Several of those were via assassinations. And yet, when the assassination attempt happened on Donald Trump, not one person looked at the CIA and said, okay, what have you been doing? When Slovakian president was shot 5 times, no one suggested it was the CIA. That's fucking mind-blowing as far as I'm concerned, because the one place that actually is authorized to do it in writing is the CIA. So why wouldn't that be the first thing somebody went around and go, where were all your people? Let me see all the shit that you've been doing, because they're the ones that does it. And the same thing is true with the unrest in these violent protests. They are the ones behind it, whether they use NGOs, whether they use foundations, all of them are fronts for the CIA in large part. Not every single NGO, but the ones that engage in the disruption of the normal course of business, generally speaking, are funded by the CIA. And after the fact, we found out that the Weather Underground was getting CIA money. The women activists back in the 60s were getting CIA money. So it should be the very first thing anybody says is, I want to see your bank statements because you're associated with the CIA. And yet we don't do that. So yes, it is absolutely plausible and probably probable that there is, behind the scenes, the unrest is being created through some funding stream that can be traced back to the CIA.
And thank you. Yeah, I kind of felt that way about what what's happening, not just at the college campuses, but now marching through the streets and blocking traffic and all this craziness, and not just speaking, for a cause, but when they're disrupting and they're,
right,
they're creating chaos.
Right.
That's what I'm referring to.
All right.
Right.
So we're over 6 o'clock. I just brought Angela up. I saw you had a request. Angela, if you want to ask your question, and then we're going to call it a night. Angela?
Can you hear me, guys?
I can hear you now.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, my blunt moment, I pushed on the mute. Guys, I wanted to add to comes to JFK files, something that I can only share in this space because it's too much to write on Twitter or the Facebook. As a student at Moscow State University in 1988, in 1989, I was a reporter at the newspaper, famous liberal newspaper, which liberal was good in Russia against the communists. It's bad in America. But I recognize a lot of documents that was released with JFK that I reviewed back in 1989 and 1990. And interesting enough, a lot of those pages, I recognize them, seeing them, review them, and KGB had access to them, and they had their own JFK files, which they did offer to Jack Matlock, American ambassador in Moscow, was offered that file, and the person who was offering that file was killed 6 months later, and his name was Alexander Men. He was sharing the JFK files with the American ambassador back then, and for some strange reason, Americans did not take it. They refused to take those files, and it was extensive. And we knew in Moscow that it was kind of open secret that who was participated, and they have documentation to prove that Lyndon Johnson, with Israeli Mossad agents and the CIA, particularly CIA, who assisted in assassination of a JFK. It was like. When I came to America in 1991, in 1992, first time I spoke about it, and I said, I've seen the documents. Everybody disregarded it. It's like, oh, no, we're not going to talk about it. It's a closed case. But I'm surprised that Americans learning something that we knew back then. And a lot of pages, I was flipping, going through this, and I remember seeing them. I have a very good memory. So I just want to say it's a good thing that finally the American people can see something that, even though I'm not Russian, don't shoot, I come in peace. I was studying in a Russian university. I'm coming from Azerbaijan, Soviet Republic. And I just want to say transparency matter, and I don't think that it's much more complicated issue of assassination of president, but it has directly to do with the foreign policy agenda. Even in Moscow, then, they tried so hard, and I was fighting KGB. I was fighting Soviet Union. I was liberal. I was protesting against the system. But nevertheless, I've seen the Soviet government tried so hard to tell the American counterparts that we have nothing to do with assassination of your president. In fact, they were actually willing and able to share intelligence. They gathered extensive files. So I hope Americans will see that files that I've seen what the Soviet KGB had on assassination of the Kennedy. That would be opening a huge discovery for American public. Because what you see now, people say, oh, they were classified. Not, I would say, based on my quick review, I would say 60% existed it. We have 40% we haven't seen it. But the 60% of the documents out of the 60,000 or 80,000 pages, I haven't finished all of them. But I would say they already existed. They were not classified. They were just kept away from the American public. But a lot of people in Britain, in Russia, and they had access to those documents. Isn't that interesting?
It's very interesting, actually. Yeah. But it's also not unusual. They do not want to take, so just so that, and we've said this repeatedly, there is no line between the CIA and the State Department, none. They basically function as a fluid organization. They like to pretend like they're separate, but they're not. And many, not all, but many of the ambassadors are they're associated with the CIA.
Seventh floor at the State Department. Seventh floor in the State Department is exactly I lived in Washington D.C. for 5 years. They call that floor, seventh floor, is
Right.
CIA headquarters.
Right. Yeah, I'm familiar with it. The embassy staff, as part of this Operation Gladio research, has been key in when I go into a new country, looking through the actual coup and the lead up to it. The very first thing I do is I find who is the station chief and who is the ambassador. And what you find repeatedly, and the COCOM, because the military, and who was NATO commander, what you find repeatedly is that it's the same people. Just like, and the very first one that kind of made me, we suspected it a lot as we initially started into this, just based on some of the stuff that we were reading. But the one, again, the one I use all the time is William Pauly. He not only was massively involved in the operational level of setting up Chiang Kai-shek and the China lobby and all of that other stuff, to include fronting as companies like the Curtis franchise over there so they could build fighters and give them to Chiang Kai-shek using covert funding. And so once you find, and then, we're doing Condor, we moved on, and he shows up as an ambassador in Latin America. And then we look at Cuba, and oh my God, he owned the airline there. He owned the bus company for the entire island. And you're like, son of a bitch, this guy shows up everywhere. And then after we were just reading, he shows up on commissions, and literally shows up everywhere. And that's how you know that oftentimes it is not unusual for an ambassador that, in the case that you just described, would be in a foreign country and somebody offers them something that's going to be contrary to the narrative that they've spun in the United States. They can't take that shit. They don't want to have their hands anywhere on that. Because if you take it, then there's an obligation to share it. And who are they going to share it with? Because they're going to be dead. Yeah, so that doesn't...
I'm just going to add one more thing very quickly. But he did take, and it cost him his career. We did my direct reporting of the genocide that happened in Azerbaijan in January 10, 1990. And I barely survived that, really. I was sent there to report this civil unrest. Turns out there was a full-blown genocide. And I witnessed 8,000 people massacred that day. And he did take that information, and that's how they allow Armenian refugees to come to America. And if anybody can Google it and search it, that for the first time in America, they allowed Armenian refugees come to America, and they settled in Boston and in California, and some of them landed in New York. But that was a scandal that cost him. Jack Matlock lost his, position as ambassador because he took that information, and Alexander lost his life over this information, and he actually we shed light that there was a massacre happening, and nobody paid attention. Comes very quickly. I'm going to address the issue of pro-Palestinian protests in New York.
Angela, I don't have no, Angela, I don't have time. Sorry about that. 6 o'clock's kind of my hard time, and we're over that already. So we're going to go ahead and sign off. And all right, there we go. My system kind of rebooted itself. I don't know what happened. Imagine Angela coming in here thinking she's going to hijack my space. She must be new. All right, you guys, have a nice weekend. Take care.